Welcome to this session on the IDA Fiscal Timeline. We're excited that you decided to spend some time with us today. I am Nancy O'Hara with the Center for IDA Fiscal Reporting, and I'm excited to be presenting with my colleague Tai Ripa, also from CIFR. And we also have James Fouch from the Oregon Office of Enhancing Student Opportunities. He's going to discuss with us his use of the IDA Fiscal Timeline. So thank you for joining us, and we are excited to keep moving forward. The IDA Fiscal Timeline, you may want to go ahead and download it as we get started. So you have a couple of options on how to download it. One is if you've already looked at the handout for this session, you can use the link that was contained in the handout. But another easy way to download the materials would be to go to the CIFR website at cifr.wested.org and just do a search for Fiscal Timeline, and it'll come up very easily. So you would want to download that, and I'm going to give you a heads up. As you download it, it comes as a folder with 3 documents in it. So while you're downloading that, I'm going to go ahead and talk to you a little bit about what that is. And then we're going to talk about all 3 of the materials that are in that folder you're downloading. What the IDA Fiscal Timeline is a really fully customizable Excel-based tool that you can use in multiple ways in your state. You can use it for planning your kind of IDA fiscal activities across the grant funding cycle. You can use it to manage the complicated and often complex IDA fiscal processes. You can also use it for training of staff. We've heard people talk about when they get new staff, it's a great resource to get started. States that have larger staff, you can kind of split it up tab by tab for those that have different fiscal responsibilities. So there's multiple ways to think about it. This tool was developed over time by the 3 centers, the 3 federal TA centers that have some fiscal responsibilities. So the National Center for Systemic Improvement, their fiscal support team was part of this. The IDA Data Center, IDC, they were part of the development, as well as CIFR staff. So it was a collaborative effort across all 3 centers. Now that you have it downloaded, we're going to spend a little time looking at one of the documents that are included in that download, and it's called Understanding the IDA Grant Funding Cycle. So when you think about the grant funding cycle, we all know it's a complex tool. So the Adobe document, PDF document that is in that folder contains a graphic that you're seeing on your screen, but it also has a couple of pages of text that define the terms you see in this graphic that explain what some of these periods are. So this also is a tool that many states have found useful in working not only with state staff, but with their LEAs as well. So as we look at this, I will also note it's been recently updated to reflect the changes in the uniform grant around the IDA liquidation periods. And so we will also look at that. So this is the most current version. As I look at it, if you look kind of in the background colors, you see that there's a very light green shaded area. That is a current fiscal year, your current state fiscal year. The majority of states have a fiscal year from July through June. So that's why we've shaded that as the most common area. If you have a state with a different fiscal year, we're happy to talk about how you could adapt this particular graphic. But the idea is in any current state fiscal year, you're probably looking at multiple years of IDA grant funding. And that's the purpose of this, is to show you and to show state staff how they overlap and how you can't just focus on one year at a time, but you absolutely have to think about multiple years and doing that. I think a lot of us have heard that phrase, first in, first out. And so if you're thinking about that, it's a new fiscal year. You may be thinking, well, we've got to start working on this year's funds, but you may have previous 2-year funds you want to get to liquidation first. So thinking about some of that is also helpful. So as we look at this, the bar, the third bar down, which is kind of a blue color, there's different variations of blue, but it's the third bar down, represents the federal year that's released of July 1st of the current fiscal year. And so, as we all know, federal fiscal years officially start October 1st, yet IDA funds become available July 1st. And so there's a forward funding period. Then there's your 12-month award year from October through September. Then all federal funds have a tidings period, which is an additional 12 months to obligate and expend funds. And then we have a liquidation period, which is used to be 90 days. It's still 90 days for your LEAs, but it's 120 days for a state in order to liquidate all the funds from a particular fiscal year. So as you can see that, it goes across multiple years that you have to use one federal year of funding. In any one state year, you have multiple years of funding you're considering. So if we move up to the second bar across the page, you'll see that when you start your state fiscal year in July of the current year, you're nearing the end of the award year from the previous federal funding and entering the tidings period. If you move up one more to the top bar in this graphic, what you see is you're nearing the end of the tidings period for federal funds that were 2 years old, and that you're going to be entering the liquidation period and have to liquidate by January in this current fiscal year. And then, of course, the bottom bar tells us that you have to also start planning. So you're in this current fiscal year managing 3 years worth of federal funds, and it's time to start planning for that 4th year or next year's funds so that you have, so you're thoughtful about how you use those, and you do the postings for your required for applying for those funds and all of those kinds of things in a timely manner. So this is available to you. It's one of the downloads. And as I said, it has recently been updated to reflect the changes. I'm now going to transition and quit sharing my screen so that we can introduce my colleague, Tai Ripa, so that he can walk you through a demonstration of the fiscal timeline.
Thank you, Nancy, and hello, everyone. So I'm going to demonstrate the functionality of Cypher's IDA Fiscal Timeline tool. So you're seeing shared on my screen the title page of the tool. If you would like to follow along with me, as Nancy mentioned, you can go ahead and download the tool and kind of play with it as I show you how it works. So I'll draw your attention to the bottom of the Excel window here on the title page, just to point out that the Fiscal Timeline has 15 worksheets or tabs here along the bottom. So there's 2 introductory tabs. There's this tab that we're on right now, and then there's the acronyms page. And that'll show you all the different acronyms that are used in the tool. And then next we have 12 fiscal requirement tabs that correspond to the core fiscal areas that the tool covers. And then we have 1 tab for the fiscal timeline, and that's where we're going to start. So this timeline is really the home base for the tool. And you can see it has fiscal activities for each fiscal area here in column B. And then the fiscal activities are all organized by a fiscal topic area, and that's in column A. So you can use the filters if you would like to focus on a specific or only see a specific area, such as allocation of subgrants, or you could search for MFS, which is what we're going to talk about today as an example. So that allows you to filter. And then I'll just draw your attention to the right of the tool and along the top here, you have the months of the fiscal year, as Nancy mentioned. And then you can see that for each fiscal activity, there's a little symbol populated in one or more months of the year here. So in the upper left-hand corner, you have a key that shows you what each of those little symbols means. So the right-facing arrow is indicating that there's ongoing work that's happening during that month. The dot is indicating that this is a month when I finish the activity. And then the star is indicating a month where there's a due date that's set by the US Department of Education. So it's indicating sort of a hard deadline there. So let's take a look as an example on the MFS activities. So the TA centers have identified 5 major activities that occur related to MFS, potentially beginning in July and running through March. So, depending on your own schedule, these activities could begin sooner or could begin later. But as early as July, a state might be beginning to work on some of that ongoing work related to MFS. So identifying and contacting other state agencies besides the SEA where funds are made available for special education and related services. And in December, you can see that the information gathering from the SEA and those agencies might begin. And around that same time, if there's a concern that the state might not meet MFS, there's going to be some ongoing work to review the calculation, to ensure that the information gathering is complete, that the calculation is accurate, and so on. And then during that time also, the state is reviewing for consistency and stability from year to year for the total amount of funds, as well as for the different fund sources. And then finally here in March, the state will provide the calculated amount on the Part B application and obtain certifications. So this dot here on row 54 is just indicating that that is the month in which the activity is typically completed. And for a few of the MFS activities, you'll notice that the IDEA State Grants tab is referenced. So we can pop that up as well. So we can see that here. And if you look at row 35 that's highlighted, you'll see that there's a star there in May that indicates that the IDEA state grant application, of which MFS reporting is of course a part, has that hard deadline in May when the state's Part B grant application is due. So even though we've pre-populated the tool for you, it's likely that you'll need to make edits to the timeline that reflect your own state's process. So you might already be thinking, hey, I don't start that work in July, and that's okay. The Fiscal Timeline tab is fully customizable, but it's not directly editable. Instead, you make any edits that you want to populate on the timeline on the corresponding fiscal requirement worksheet. So I'll just go ahead and sort of reset this tab, and I'll show you what that looks like. So if I want to jump to a fiscal requirement worksheet or edit in more detail, I can click here if I want to, or I can click on a tab along the bottom to jump over there. So we can jump to MFS to stick with our theme here. So here again, we have the activity, but now we have more information about it. So we have the federal citation, and we have some additional information that might help us to complete the activity. So in this case, if we look at row 7, for example, if I'm a new fiscal staff person and I'm wondering what does it mean to review and verify funds and fund sources? Or if I'm a seasoned staff person and I just want to confirm what I think I know about this activity, I can see the additional information. Okay, so here's what that means. I need to be reviewing all the amounts that have been received from other agencies. If there's any amounts that appear significantly lower than I was expecting, I'll want to contact that agency and figure out the reason why, correct any possible errors. I'll be reviewing all amounts in each component of the calculation to determine if any are lower than expected. I'll contact responsible individuals to determine why or why not things are potentially off from what I was expecting. And I'll just make sure that all components of the calculation have been included. So there's quite a bit of information sort of packed in there that might help me to complete that activity. And then it also shows me on this tab what the TA centers start as they set as the start and end month for the activity. But as I mentioned, just because it's recommended, that doesn't mean that's necessarily when I should do it. It's going to depend on the activity and the timing of my state's fiscal year, as Nancy mentioned, and then just sort of the order of my own internal processes. So if I want to, I can also edit the schedule of activities to align with my state in these columns D and E here. So for example, maybe I actually start gathering this information that's referenced in row 5. Maybe I actually start gathering that information in, let's say, January, and I actually end in, let's say, March. So any changes that I make here are actually going to be reflected now again on the fiscal timeline. So we can go back and check to see if that's the case. And we can just filter ourselves to MFS and see what it shows. Okay, now instead of this activity beginning in December, it begins in January and it goes through March. I can also set new start dates, or sorry, new end months for the SEA processes if I want to as well. So I can also edit the additional column directly if I want to. So I can edit this information here. But if I want to keep what the TA Center providers have suggested go there, I also have this other option over here for adding state-specific information in this right-hand column. So I can add information about my process, maybe who is responsible, where I can find the data, the exact date in the month when I need to have it complete. So I can add whatever might be useful to my team here. And I can even link, if I want to specific internal processes that might be on a shared drive that folks can reference. And then when I scroll down, you can see that there are extra rows. You can add additional activities here. Those will also just go ahead and populate on the fiscal timeline. So everything will be in the same place. I can also edit the order of the activities in the list. I can plug something in between row 6 and 7 if I'd like to. I never want to use the cut feature because it will break the tool, but I can copy and paste reorder, and it shows you how to do that in the instructions document that'll download along with the understanding fiscal years and the timeline tool itself. And then if I scroll down here, we have a list of resources that are related to the topic area, along with the description of the resource and where I can find it. And then finally, just want to show you this tab, the other state information tab. So this is an empty tab that a state can use for a process that's just not covered in an earlier tab. So for example, maybe you have a process for contracting with other agencies, or maybe you're not only in charge of IDA fiscal activities, but you're in charge of other activities as well. And you'd like to add those in here, you can do that. And when I do that, and I set my end dates, my start and my end dates, that is also just going to go and populate on the timeline. So I can click here to return to the timeline. And then if I scroll all the way down, here's my other state information now showing that I have some ongoing work related to contracting that runs from July to September. So those really are the basics of the tool. And I'm going to go ahead and end my screen share here so we can talk with James from Oregon about how he uses the tool in his work. All right, hi, James.
Hi, Tai.
So to begin with, if you could just give us a little bit of an introduction to you, what your role is in Oregon and how long you've been doing this work.
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is James Fouch. Obviously, as you can see, I work for the Department of Education in Oregon. And my primary role is I'm part of a team that helps manage all aspects of our federal IDEA grants, including Section 611, 619, and Part C. And we also help manage some state funds as well as some other grants like the SPDIG, which for the life of me, I am not remembering what that stands for off the top of my head. but it's another discretionary grant from the Department of Ed. And I've been doing this work for 2 years now. Yeah.
Great. All right. So your team does a whole lot of different things related to fiscal, not just IDEA fiscal, but can you tell us a little bit about why you were interested in the fiscal timeline resources specifically?
Sure. So when I started in this role, I quickly realized that the state had lost some institutional knowledge around IDEA and fiscal processes within the last several years. And so we knew that we were missing some things on that cycle. And so we reached out to Cypher, asked a few questions. They pointed us to the fiscal timeline tool. And it's been a massive help ever since.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's something we hear commonly is that as state folks with a lot of expertise retire, there's sort of that hole is left there, and that the fiscal timeline can help fill in that gap. And can you tell a little bit about how you've used the different pieces of the tool? So maybe starting with the understanding fiscal years graphic that Nancy presented on.
Sure. We've used it externally as well as internally. There's at least one district I remember I showed it to them, and it really just opened their mind and how to think about their grant. It changed how they decided to move forward with not only planning but actual expenditures and things of that nature. It really just opened their eyes. And internally we use it. It has really helped, especially other offices who don't deal with the work on a regular basis, and within my own office for that matter, how much money we're dealing with at any given time. And it's these federal grants are the largest that we get in Oregon.
Yeah, that makes sense. Helps to organize that large chunk of money and think about how it flows over time. Makes sense. And how about the actual fiscal timeline itself? How are you using that?
So currently, we're really using it as a check on what we're supposed to be doing at any given time. As I mentioned before, we lost some institutional knowledge. We're still trying to get that, basically everything that's in the fiscal timeline tool, put into policy and procedure documents. So we're really using it as here's the list of everything that you really need to do and all of the checkboxes for it. And it really, it helps remind us of all the little things that tend to get lost in the shuffle, especially when we're dealing with 3, sometimes 4 different grants at any given time. And we're really kind of leaning on the tool because we don't want to reinvent the wheel.
Right. That makes sense. And you have a great analogy about the IDEA fiscal. What is the analogy that you're sharing with us earlier?
So I like to refer to IDEA finance and the procedures around it as interpretive dance because it's so confusing. And the fiscal timeline tool, I feel really, it gives you the steps for that dance. So you can just reproduce it.
Yeah, I love that. I'm definitely going to quote you on that at some point. And what are so I know sometimes when folks want to implement a new tool or a new process in their state, they can run into some barriers with that. And so I'm wondering if you can share with other states who are listening what barriers you've experienced.
Yeah, and I'm sure other states have had similar issues, that they've got their own unique context. Oregon does as well, and it's really translating that Oregon specific context into the tool. For example, Oregon's state dollars function on a 2-year cycle, so there are certain things that we don't do but once every couple of years. And trying to translate that 2-year cycle, that state 2-year cycle, into an annual federal cycle is not the easiest of things to do at times.
Right.
On top of that, there's always the capacity issue. There's staffing, and it can be a matter of just prioritizing the work.
Right.
We would love to take the time to really delve into the tool and start plugging in all of the, well, this is when we start this, and this is when we start that, right? We just haven't had the chance to prioritize it yet.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that is a common sort of pitfall that happens in states. And I just wanted to point out too that for you and for others, that Cypher does offer sort of some facilitation help with that. If it's something that folks are interested in, we can come in and sort of be that third party to help set aside that time virtually or in person. So so that's always an option. If folks who are listening are interested in that, you can always get in touch with your state liaison to talk about that. And so you've had some of those barriers, but I've also heard you talk a little bit about some benefits of the tool. And do you have anything else to sort of share about some of the benefits that you've experienced?
Yeah, it really does keep us on track. We can easily see at any given time during the year what needs to be done. And I think even larger than that, it really helps to protect and promote that institutional knowledge. Without this tool, I think I ran some numbers in my head a few days ago. I think without this tool, if I was to try and do this on my own, it would take years of study of IDEA to figure it out. With this tool, I can get it down in a couple of days.
Yeah, that's amazing and great to hear. And I know it did take us a long time to to create the tool, and we were lucky to have a lot of folks who have been working in this space for a long time who could help us fill in some of these blanks. So that's awesome to hear. And just, I know that you're sort of just getting started with it. You're using it now as this sort of step-by-step guide. Do you have a vision for how your team might use it in the future at all?
Yeah, I think it's really getting that Oregon specific stuff, especially our procurement timeline. I would like to really get our procurement timeline in there, contracting, granting, things of that nature, and really start getting all of those dates, like when we start what in there, so that we can start conceptualizing all of the things that happen. Like, here's July, here's all of the things that we really need to be doing in July, et cetera, throughout the year.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's great to hear. And hopefully Cypher can help you with that as well as you move forward with it. It's so good to hear your experience. And I know states who are listening, and they always value hearing the state perspective. So I want to just thank you so much for taking this time out of your day to come and chat with us about your experience with the tool. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And everybody out there listening, go get this tool and use it. It's a massive help. It's been a lifesaver for us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, James. Okay, so the tool is available on the Cypher website if you'd like to download it. And as Nancy mentioned, when you do download it, you'll get a set of instructions, and you'll also get the Understanding IDEA grant funding cycle document. I highly recommend that you look at the instructions before you start making edits to the tool. I mentioned you don't want to cut, you just want to copy and paste. Things like that, little tips and tricks for how to edit the tool will be available to you in that instructional document. And then if you have any questions about the tool, if you want to know more about its functionality, if you want to understand better how you can use it or how Cypher can help you, please reach out to us. You can always contact your state liaison at Cypher. You can also contact one of us, and we're happy to provide you with the information that you're looking for. We've provided our contact information for you here if you'd like to do that. Thank you all so much for watching our presentation, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.